everyone. This is my presentation on adapting to sea level rise in coastal BC.
So what can sea level rise do? Well, there can be flooding, challenged drainage, erosion, sweeping changes to habitats, loss of salt marshes and other wetlands, decrease in sea ice, and increasing storms, waves, and surges, often of greater intensity. And you can see here in the photo, this is the city of White Rock being pounded by waves during a storm in 2016. With Climate Central's new mapping system, you can see the Lower Mainland will have much severer sea level rise problems. It makes a huge difference. Now in 2013, the BC government made some guidelines for adapting to sea level rise. And you can see in this graphic here, this is like the basic concept of adaptation. So, protect, or in other words, resist. It is a traditional approach used worldwide. It's more reactive than proactive. And this is where we employ structural mechanisms such as dikes, seawalls, and groins, which are low walls or sturdy barriers built out into the sea from a beach to check erosion and drifting. So this protect strategy is most popular, but unfortunately it's very costly and it may not be reasonable in the long run. Next we have accommodate, which is where coastal areas continue to be occupied, but we make changes to our activities and to the infrastructure. For example, buildings may be retrofitted and made more resilient. Newly constructed buildings can be elevated with structural fill. We can have residential zoning, which limits areas to be built upon and where garages and crawl spaces are basically allowed to be flooded. Or zoning would have setbacks on the property to keep houses away from flood courses. We have avoid, which means new developments are forbidden in ongoing local government community planning. Because of medium to high risk, a city may acquire land or transfer potential development to more lower risk locations. And lastly, we have retreat or move. And the BC guidelines, they also call it managed retreat. So here, policy planners decide to leave public or private buildings as an adaptive means of limiting use of expensive structural protection. So this squeezes out development in high-risk areas and makes plans for buildings and infrastructure to be located to less risky places. Now, yes, in IPCC speak, basically, the International Panel of Climate Change, this is called relocation or resettlement, managed retreat, or managed realignment. So governments from national down to municipal, they initiate and manage a process of moving people and infrastructure, and they're moved to places that are less risky. Now let's look at an example. The city of Vancouver in southwest BC. Now, this is where I was born. The city is known for its natural beauty because there is an ocean to the west, and to the north we have snow-capped mountains. The problem with Vancouver is that the population keeps rising and it just keeps growing and growing. Now, the Port of Vancouver, it just continues to grow its facilities despite warnings about sea level rise. The Port of Vancouver leaders may see it as decades off. They're not really looking at what sea level rise can do in the immediate future. Their concern is to keep up with the surging trade volumes. In contrast to the Port of Vancouver, we have the City of Vancouver, which is known throughout Canada and perhaps the world for its progressive attitudes and its role as a green city. So, for example, in January 2019, City Council passed a climate emergency declaration. And they also voted to adopt what they call the 6 big moves to battle climate change. And one of the goals is to reduce Vancouver's carbon pollution by basically 500,000 tons per year by 2030. And this is equivalent to 46% of the city's goal to reach 1.2 million tons. Now, on the adaptation side, Vancouver is equally progressive. The City of Vancouver has identified several risks from sea level rise, such as king tides, which are natural high tides coupled with storm surge, and this arrives every winter 3 or 4 times, and the surges could make the regular high tides 50 to 100 centimeters higher. Another problem is coastal squeeze resulting from sea level rise and increasing industrial activity. And then there is Fraser River foreshore and floodplain flooding, and the potential for flooding around the bustling economic center of downtown Vancouver. Now you can see from the next slide here that the City of Vancouver has a resist strategy in flood adaptation, and this is a graphic showing how it works. So in response to sea level rise, Vancouver has undertaken a coastal flood risk assessment. It's worked on a CAP, which is a coastal adaptation plan for the Fraser River. It has upgraded its building bylaws for floodplains. It has partnered with BC Storm Surge Forecasting Program for forecasts for storm surges. It has began requiring flood risk data in all its new coastline projects, and it is engaged in public consultations for feedback and solutions. Now let's take a look at the city of Surrey, which is basically southeast of the city of Vancouver. And Surrey has 20% of its land base that could be subject to coastal flooding. Now this includes Semiahmoo First Nation, right beside White Rock, residential areas, farms, and major infrastructure and transportation corridors, and also wildlife habitats. Also at risk in Surrey are the homes of many residents, several $1 billion in property value, thousands of jobs, and over $25 billion in railway and trucking business. But luckily, the city has a plan. Surrey has a coastal flood adaptation strategy, CFAS, that helps the areas that are more effective, such as Mud Bay, Crescent Beach, and Semiahmoo Bay. So basically, funding for this project has come from the city and also the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. It's called the Municipalities for Climate Innovation Program. The team from the city, including a senior project engineer named Matt Osler, they've included extensive community engagement sessions where Surrey residents can give their own input. Now, the city of Surrey has had hazards from floods and from the ocean for a long time. So already there has been dikes, sea dams, flood boxes, pumps, and spills for many decades. But these need to be upgraded. So the new plan, it seeks to use modern adaptive methods to deal with sea level rise. And there also is the possibility of using managed retreat. For example, in Crescent Beach, the city may buy out 400 homes along the shoreline, and people will be compensated and they'll have to move. And lastly, we have the city of Campbell River, which is on the eastern coast, up north a little bit, on Vancouver Island. Now, this city has been recognized for its climate action over the years, and it is teamed up with ICLEI Canada, Local Governments for Sustainability, for a project to examine the local climate risks and come up with an adaptation plan. Now you can see here, this is basically a map of Campbell River and some of the flood risk areas. So there's a YouTube video. I'll just show you a screen grab of what it looks like. It came out this past summer, 2019. It showed Campbell River's sea level rise adaptation strategies. The city is following provincial guidelines for 1 extra meter. And perhaps with this new data that's saying sea level rise will probably be much worse, they'll need to plan for even more than 1 meter. So in Campbell River, Highway 19A is going to be reconstructed. There's also a park called Robert V. Osler Park that has previously been damaged by flooding storm surges. So there has to be some adaptation there. And to the downtown of Campbell River, probably going to have to raise some buildings, and walkways have to be changed along the seashore. So some of the measures will be soft shore armor for beaches. They'll put marshes, extra vegetation, and gentle beach slopes. There'll also be some hard shore armor, adaptive measures. So this is where large boulders are put onto the shoreline to break up incoming waves. Conclusion. So as we've seen, BC's coast, along with major cities such as Vancouver, faces huge challenges with sea level rise, and we've analyzed what BC should do to tackle climate change through adaptative measures. Increasing greenhouse gases causing an upswing in global temperatures has become an engine pushing more sea level rise, and it, as we have seen from Climate Central's modeling, it could be much, much worse. So this means that governments and populations along the coastline must adapt using the best means possible. We've also shone a light on the risks that sea level rise forces onto coastline cities, and we've looked at the jurisdiction and some adaptative methods. Finally, we've taken a look at 3 examples of coastal communities in BC. We have 2 in the Lower Mainland, Vancouver and Surrey. And we've also looked at Vancouver Island's Campbell River to see how they have planned to adapt to sea level rise. In conclusion, BC's coastal communities can better survive and also thrive in the face of sea level rise as they use the best possible sea level rise adaptation methods in the coming years. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful end of semester, Christmas, and New Year.